Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Okay, so this might sound a little out there, but think about a lobster for a second.
A lobster. Okay, where are we going with this?
These, relatively simple nervous systems.
Mm.
And their neurons, they're huge comparatively. Really easy for scientists to observe and study.
Right, much less complex than ours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because of that sort of simplicity, figuring out the lobster brain has genuinely given us a leg up, in understanding our own much, much more complicated neural wiring.
That's fascinating, and it ties right into what we're exploring today, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're diving into this text that hinges on what seems like, well, really basic advice.
Which is?
Stand up straight with your shoulders back. I mean, sounds like something your grandma would tell you.
Totally. Just posture, right?
On the surface, yes. But as the source material we looked at argues, it's way deeper than that. It connects to something really fundamental about life itself, something we see across the board. Lobsters on the ocean floor, birds in the trees, chickens in the yard, even us.
You're talking about dominance hierarchies.
Precisely, this whole idea of social ranking.
Okay, so this deep dive then. Think of it as a way to get why that simple posture advice actually carries so much weight.
Yeah, we're going to unpack how it links up with, social dynamics, brain chemistry, even your overall well-being.
And hopefully do it in a way that, just clicks. Without getting bogged down in technical stuff, we want those sort of aha moments for you.
Those moments where you see how these ancient patterns still play out. So let's kick things off with just how common these hierarchies are. The text really hammers this point home.
Right, back to the lobsters.
Exactly. They're not just milling around down there. They need territory, a home base, right? For food, for shelter.
And space is limited, I assume.
Very limited and valuable. So you get lots of lobsters competing for the best spots. Conflict is, well, pretty much inevitable.
Makes sense. And it's not just crustaceans fighting over real estate. The text talks about songbirds too, doesn't it?
It does. You hear birdsong in the spring, sounds lovely to us.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, but the text describes it as like siren calls and cries of domination. They're essentially shouting, "This is my patch, stay out."
Wow. So even a little wren, which seems so delicate.
Oh, yeah, the source mentions wrens specifically, fiercely territorial. Apparently, they'll even sabotage a neighbor trying to move in, filling up their birdhouse with sticks.
That's hardcore.
Yeah.
It really underlines that drive for security, for resources.
Fundamental. And think about chickens. This Norwegian scientist, Sheldrup Eby, observed them way back in 1921.
Ah, the pecking order. I've heard of that.
That's him. And it's not just, social status for its own sake. It directly impacts survival when food's scarce.
The ones at the top eat first.
Right. And the ones at the bottom, they might not get anything. It's pretty brutal.
A tough world, even in the coop. And what about those songbirds again? They're not exactly living in tight communities like chickens, are they?
No, not as communal, but the hierarchy principle still applies. The strongest, maybe the luckiest birds, they snag the prime territories.
Which gives them an edge.
A huge edge. Better nesting spots, better access to food, attracts better mates. Their offspring are more likely to survive because they face fewer stresses. It all links back to territory quality.
Okay, so this brings up the question for you listening.
Yeah.
How does this map onto human experience? The text draws a clear line, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Just like those lower status birds are more vulnerable, the text suggests humans lower down the social ladder tend to have higher rates of, all sorts of diseases. Infectious, non-infectious.
And more stress, too, presumably.
Definitely more stress. It's a consistent finding.
All right, so hierarchies are everywhere. They involve competition, sometimes conflict. But it's not constant warfare, is it? How do they manage it? Let's go back to the lobsters. They have ways of sorting things out, right?
Oh, yeah. It's quite sophisticated, actually. Multi-stage. They don't just jump into a fight.
What's step one?
They might start with, posture and claw displays, showing off their size, their weapons.
A bit of flexing?
Kind of. Then they can release chemicals into the water.
Chemicals? Like what?
Basically broadcasting their vital stats. Size, sex, health, even their mood, apparently. Like a chemical CV.
Okay. What if that doesn't settle it?
Then they might whip their antenna at each other, maybe flick their tails to jet water.
Yeah.
It escalates. Actual physical combat is usually the last resort.
Why? Because fighting is risky.
Extremely risky. The text emphasizes this. A real fight, claws snapping.
Mm-hmm.
They can lose limbs, antenna, eyes. Serious damage.
Even if they win, they could be injured.
Exactly. And that makes them vulnerable later. So they've evolved these less costly ways to figure out who's boss, minimize the damage.
Makes sense. Figure out who's tougher without actually, tearing each other apart. But what happens when a lobster does lose? The text mentions it's more than just physical defeat.
Oh, much more. A defeated lobster, it says, loses confidence. Can last for days. It walks differently, carries itself differently.
Wow. And gets even more interesting, right? If a dominant lobster takes a really bad loss.
Yeah, this is wild. Its brain chemistry can actually change. It basically grows a new, more subordinate, appropriate brain to match its new, lower status.
That's incredible. Which leads us neatly into the neurochemistry side of things.
Right. The source highlights two key chemicals in lobsters, serotonin and octopamine.
Serotonin. That rings a bell. Linked to mood in humans, right?
It is,
Yeah.
often associated with well-being, confidence, status. In lobsters, it seems the ratio between serotonin and octopamine is crucial.
How so?
Well, winning a fight, that increases the serotonin relative to octopamine. And that leads
It's
to
a confident behavior, standing taller.
Exactly. That swaggering posture the text described. They act like winners because their brain chemistry reflects the win. It shows how deep these feelings run, They're not just thoughts. They're tied to ancient chemical signals.
Okay, and get this connection. The text makes it mind-blowing. Human antidepressants, SSRIs.
Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They increase available serotonin.
They give these drugs to lobsters. And
And it has a similar effect. Prozac seems to, cheer up lobsters, make them more confident, more likely to engage in dominant behavior.
seriously, that's amazing. It shows how fundamental these systems are,
Yeah,
conserved across hundreds of millions of years of evolution.
it really does. Now, flip side, what happens to the loser?
Let me guess. Low serotonin, high octopamine.
You got it. And the behavior matches. That hunched over, scrunched up look, hesitant, easily startled.
The text draws a parallel there too, right, to humans.
Yeah, it likens that hyper alert, jumpy state to what you see in people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that constant vigilance.
So these encounters, winning and losing, they etch themselves right into the lobster's biology. Deep, lasting effects.
Absolutely. It's not just a momentary thing. And this idea of winners and losers leads to another principle the text discusses, unequal distribution.
Ah, yeah. It says something like winner take all in the lobster world.
Right. And then it makes this really striking comparison to human society, specifically how wealth tends to get distributed.
You mean like a few people having most of the money?
Exactly. But the text argues it's broader than just money. It applies almost anywhere there's creative production.
Like what?
Think about science. Who publishes the most cited papers? Or music. How many artists dominate the charts? Books, the bestseller lists, even classical composers centuries ago.
So a small number of people produce a huge chunk of the output.
A tiny percentage often produces the vast majority. It's not just that inequality exists, it's that in creative domains, a very small group has a disproportionately massive impact. It really changes how you think about success, doesn't it?
It does. The text mentions a few names for this. Price's Law, Pareto Principle.
Right. And the Matthew principle from the Bible verse.
To those who have everything, more will be given.
And from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. It sounds harsh, but the text presents it as a kind of natural law of distribution we see over and over. Price's law, for example, it's just something like if you have, say, 100 scientists,
Yeah.
the square root of that number, so 10 scientists, will likely produce about half of all the significant publications from that group.
Only 10 out of 100 doing half the important work.
Yeah.
Wow, that's skewed.
It's incredibly skewed. And this connects right back to our brains and how we perceive our place in the world.
How so?
The text argues that the part of our brain that figures out where we stand in these hierarchies, it's ancient. Really, really old. Like lobster level old.
A kind of internal status detector.
Basically, yeah. A master control system, you could say. And it profoundly shapes how we see things, how we feel, what we do. It's running constantly in the background.
So where you perceive yourself on that ladder, top or bottom, makes a huge difference to your actual experience of life.
Massive difference. The text paints a pretty clear picture. Top of the heap. Generally, better access to resources, mates, opportunities. People are more likely to cooperate with you. Life tends to be, less stressful.
In the bottom.
Much tougher. Poorer health outcomes, like we mentioned. More stress, fewer opportunities, more vulnerable to, negative spirals. And you can probably feel this yourself, right? Think about times you felt really valued versus times you felt Not so much. It changes your whole outlook.
Yeah, definitely. And the text calls this brain mechanism the dominance counter.
That's the term it uses. It's constantly monitoring social cues, how you're being treated,
And adjusting brain chemistry accordingly.
primarily serotonin levels, it suggests. If the world treats you like you're low status, the counter restricts serotonin. That makes you more stressed, more reactive to threats, maybe more anxious or depressed.
But if you're perceived as high status,
Serotonin flows more freely. You feel more secure, calmer, more confident.
okay, but this counter, it can go wrong, can't it? The text talks about malfunctions.
It can. Things like really erratic routines, bad sleep, weird eating patterns, just general chaos in your life can apparently throw it off kilter.
Like an orchestra where everyone's playing out of time.
That's a great analogy the text uses, yeah. The body needs rhythm, predictability. That's why simple things like regular sleep, maybe a good protein-focused breakfast, are suggested as ways to help regulate that internal state. They provide stability.
Beyond just bad habits, though, the text gets into these things called positive feedback loops.
Right. And these can be really destructive. Think about audio feedback at a concert, that horrible screeching sound.
Ugh, yeah, it hurts your ears.
That happens because a small sound from the speaker gets picked up by the microphone, amplified, sent back to the speaker, amplified again. It spirals out of control.
Okay, I get the analogy.
Yeah.
How does that apply to us?
Well, the text argues similar runaway loops can happen in our psychology. It gives examples like addiction.
Like drinking more to cure a hangover, which just makes the next hangover worse.
Exactly, or anxiety disorders. Agoraphobia is a classic example it uses. Someone has a panic attack in public, maybe on a bus,
Okay.
so they start avoiding buses, which temporarily reduces anxiety, sure, but it also reinforces the idea that buses are dangerous. So the fear grows, the avoidance spreads, maybe to trains, then crowds, then leaving the house at all. The avoidance feeds the fear, which feeds the avoidance.
It's a trap, a self-perpetuating cycle.
Precisely. And trauma, like being bullied, can also set up these negative loops. It can sensitize that dominance counter.
Ow.
Well, if you're bullied, you might adopt defensive behaviors, right? Slumped posture, avoiding eye contact. That might be protective initially. But the text suggests that posture, that demeanor, can sometimes continue to signal vulnerability, potentially attracting more negative attention even if the original bullies are gone. It makes further bad experiences more likely.
Wow, that's rough. So how do you break out of these loops? How do you rise up, so to speak?
Well, the text acknowledges sometimes people are targeted because they're physically weaker. That's one factor.
But not the only one.
No. Often, it suggests it's because someone is unwilling to push back. Maybe they're too agreeable, too compassionate, or they fundamentally believe any kind of aggression is wrong.
So they don't stand up for themselves.
Right. And this leads to the idea of needing what the text calls integrated aggression.
Integrated aggression. Sounds a bit intense.
It does, but the idea isn't about becoming a bully yourself. It's about acknowledging that the capacity for, let's say, assertiveness, for setting boundaries, even for righteous anger, is necessary for self-protection.
So knowing you can push back makes it less likely you'll have to.
That seems to be the argument. Being able to say no to signal that you won't be exploited paradoxically makes actual conflict less likely. People respect boundaries.
And the text mentions something powerful about people discovering this capacity within themselves, right? Especially if they've been like overly passive before.
Yeah, it describes it as a potential turning point. Learning to access and maybe even express anger when appropriate can actually decrease fear and increase self-respect. It's counterintuitive, maybe.
It is. But makes a certain kind of sense. There's a striking line. Something about the capacity for mayhem being related to strength of character.
Yes. There is very little difference between the capacity for mayhem and destruction, integrated, and strength of character. It's a provocative statement, suggesting that true strength involves acknowledging and mastering the darker potentials within us, not just denying them.
Okay, heavy stuff. But it brings us back.
Yeah.
Full circle, really, to posture.
Exactly. Back to stand up straight with your shoulders back.
And now we see it's not just about looking good. That slumped posture
Is linked neurochemically to the defeated lobster. Low serotonin, signaling defeat, vulnerability.
and that affects how you feel and how others treat you.
Absolutely. It feeds into those feedback loops we talked about.
So standing up straight, the text calls it metaphysical, not just physical. What's that mean?
It means it's more than just arranging your bones. It's adopting an attitude. It's signaling to yourself and the world that you're willing to face life head on. You're voluntarily accepting the challenges, the burdens, the complexity of being.
Instead of shrinking away.
Right. And when you consciously adopt that physical stance, shoulders back, head up, looking forward, your nervous system actually responds differently. It's not just pretending.
It can trigger a change.
It can help trigger a positive feedback loop. You hold yourself more confidently. Maybe people react to you slightly more positively. You notice that. It boosts your actual confidence a bit. Your serotonin might get a little nudge.
Which makes you carry yourself even better.
Exactly. That small, conscious, physical change can cascade into changes in your internal state and your social interactions. It's a way to start shifting the dynamic.
Okay, so the core takeaway here for you listening seems to be that simple act, standing tall, shoulders back, it's a surprisingly potent first step.
It really is. It's not magic. It won't solve everything overnight, but it's a way to engage with these ancient hierarchical systems, influence your own brain chemistry, and change the signals you're sending out.
It's about showing up differently physically and, well, metaphysically.
Yeah. And that leads to a final thought, maybe something for you to chew on after this.
Go on.
Just how much are these ancient social dynamics, the kind we see even in lobsters, still shaping your daily life, your interactions, how you feel?
How might paying conscious attention to something as seemingly small as your posture actually ripple outwards, affecting your well-being, your opportunities, your place in the world?
It's definitely something to think about, isn't it? How the physical and the psychological are so deeply intertwined.